What is it?
The main thing I got from it was like this sense of feeling seen and validated.
Well, why does it have to be this way?
This book was placed in my hand for this moment.
Insightful, learned a lot, wrote some quotes that I'm ready to like paint on my wall.
I love this book!
That we just kind of pull out some of the big themes that we see and talk about a few different ones.
I apologize if most of my contribution has K-pop references.
Alternative book title, The Feminine Mystique Part 2. You were really just gay all along. Welcome to Book Club
With Julia
and Victoria.
Two burnt-out gifted kids who are relearning to love reading for fun. And we'd like to be your book friends.
This is a podcast for the books we just can't shut up about.
This week, we are properly losing our minds over Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, a thriller/monster/marriage drama novel about a woman whose wife has just returned from an extended deep sea mission and is now different. That is all I can say before the spoiler warning.
Yes. Okay, so major spoilers ahead. If you haven't read this book and you care about spoilers, hit pause, come back, we'll still be here. But whether or not you've read the book, you are welcome here for this discussion. We are so excited to talk about Our Wives Under the Sea.
Chances are you're here because you saw the name of this book and you were like, oh my god, I've been waiting to talk to someone about this. Because that's exactly how we feel. And we're happy to provide that for you. But just before we get into it, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but we haven't exactly been super active on the feed recently. And that is for a few reasons. We have had a lot of life changes in the last few months. We also felt like maybe we were not the best place to be putting your attention at this point in time. Not really about us right now. And I think just the process of reading in our current life stage, in the current world we live in, can sometimes feel like a challenge. And we were really inspired putting this episode together to look into monsters. How are monsters, and particularly we each have kind of a favorite monster, which is also going to be something that we explore, but how are particular monsters, how have they been used to tell stories over the years and to look at the monsters of our own world in a new way? And we each have a favorite. Victoria, as we have discussed at length, is a vampire girly, and I love cephalopods. I love an octopus. I love an octopus story. And so we are very excited to be putting together a more concentrated, focused series, sort of mini-series, in which we each put together kind of an introductory episode where we just go over an overview of each of these monsters, and then focused episodes where we sort of go back and forth and address different themes related to each monster and reading a particular book each week. That is going to be coming this summer. We're doing a ton of reading and a ton of research. We're going to talk about all of it. It's meant to both be fun and inspire us to want to read and continue to learn and grow as people, but also as some time of doing some listening. So this episode is going to be serving as a kind of introduction to that series. It wasn't the original intention when we read this book, but putting this episode together, we have decided that that's how we're going to transition. So we really loved how the monster in this book was used to talk about so many important things. So instead of, promoting ourselves and talking about how you can support the show and all that good stuff, instead we're just promoting our upcoming series. Please stay subscribed. We're gonna have some really cool stuff coming up that we're really excited about. And yeah, check the links in the show notes for things about trusted donation sources for Palestine, how to get educated, where to boycott and divest, and all that good stuff. With a particular guide for contacting congresspeople for autistic or neurodivergent folks, for whom that might be a more daunting task. So all that stuff is in the show notes, and let's get into it.
So, Julia, you were the one that brought Our Wives Under the Sea to the book club. What was your experience reading, and what was your emotional journey? Walk us through it.
Boy howdy. Okay.
Boy howdy, I like
Boy
that.
howdy. My good friend in Belgium recommended this book to me. Shout out Katie. She actually read it while the whole idiot millionaire submersible drama was happening. Like, it was actively happening, and she was reading this book. And so she was constantly talking about the dangers of the abyssal zone, which was suddenly a term that everyone knew out of nowhere, which is just like such a particular pop culture moment that we will just never get back. And it's so funny to me. And so she just really loved talking about how validated she was about her fear of the deep ocean, which is something that she and I both share. My most primal fears are deep space and the deep ocean. So yeah, so I knew that this book would freak me out. We talked a lot about that. But she really, really loved the book. And so I was like, okay, I trust you. Let's do this. Because neither of us are really like thriller or horror people most of the time. This is something we've talked about before.
Yeah, we tend to come at it like sideways, I feel like. We come through books where we're like, oh, we know this author, so we know it'll be interesting. We've heard it's, horror, creepy, but like sounds something like we can handle. And that's also how I felt about this one. As far as like, it's also pitched as like, it's deep sea and spooky, but also like marriage drama. And I'm like, I can come in lesbian marriage drama, and then see if I'm here for the horror elements.
So I had to read this very slowly at first. I was reading like one Mary chapter, one Leah chapter, like every couple nights. Because it has this strange combination of like nothing happening. So it's not super, you're not super pushed forward by the plot. But then it ends with, like, one of the most haunting sentences you've ever read in your entire goddamn life. And so then you're just like, you're just, like,
now sitting. I need to read the next chapter.
So you're just sitting in this, like, ominous, claustrophobic, slow-paced soup. Like, it feels like you're kind of suspended in the deep ocean a bit. And so I had some, I was very anxious. But I really wanted to keep reading, but then once I got to like somewhere in the beginning of the abyssal zone section, so like the last two sections really, I just got super hooked and I could not stop until I finished it, which I think was similar for both of us. Mostly, which is kind of funny, because I was kind of terrified that there wouldn't end up being a monster, which is so opposite, I think, of what like most people are like terrified of the monster. And I was like, if they don't give me a monster, I'm gonna be so pissed. Like, if this ends up just being like an indictment of capital exploitation, I'm gonna be so angry.
Yeah, I had that feeling too of like, I just need to know how it ends.
Yes.
Even if some parts felt like, I know what's going to happen. I know in a sense that like Leah's going to be gone in some way. Mm-hmm. This is grieving the end. I don't think there's like saving her life in her human body and their relationship, but it was like, I need to know where we end up, and especially what happened on the ship.
Yeah. You get to the end, like, I'm reading all this, like, because I need to know what happens. I need to see this monster. I need to understand why. And then you're, like, sidelined with just, like, so much this overwhelming grief and sadness and love and loss, because you're just like sobbing at 3 a.m. just like, she wouldn't stop looking at her and she let her go in the water, but then when she turned into a jellyfish and then she came back up and she was just thinking about her wife, and then those are my thoughts just on repeat for like an hour. The repetition of my Leah in the final chapter, I think, was what did me in. Just the amount of, you've been through so much pain and stress this entire book, and then at the end, they are both so in love with each other. Like, she's just repeating my Leah, my Leah, my Leah over and over and over again. Leah is just thinking Mary, 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 Mary. Like, it's just, they're both so in love with each other. And it's so heartbreaking. Like, what a slow build. What a devastating, beautiful love story. Like, oh my god, what a time. But then also sort of cracking myself up at the same time. Because I'm having all these like really sad thoughts and like sobbing and whatever, but then also the first thing my brain pulls up is like Buttons in Our Flag Means Death season 2 going, to love the sea as she must be loved requires change.
Yes.
Because she turns into
It's so
a jellyfish.
though. That's like the perfect line for that.
I know. Because Leah now has to be changed in order to be one with the sea, and Miri has to change in order to love the sea, because now her girlfriend is her wife is part of it. How dare I say girlfriend? Her wife. And just, oh my god. Anyway. I feel like we all went on very similar journeys. Would you say that you relate?
Yeah. I saw on social media a few friends of mine post, you know, covers of this book or saying like, I just finished this, I need to talk about it. Like, has anyone read this?
Yeah.
Very urgently.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I see. And so when you mentioned it, I was like, here we go. Let's read it.
You were ready.
And one of those friends in particular, she and I have a lot of overlapping book interests. So I was like, here we go. The book did not disappoint me. I was reading, similar to you, a few chapters at a time, maybe a little quicker pace than you were, but ultimately like stayed up real late one night to finish the whole book. And I feel like I've been in a little bit of a reading drought lately, like a bit of a reading rut, where I haven't been super interested in picking up new books, and the books I have started were kind of long to get through. But this was like one of the bright spots in the last like month of reading, where I was like, I think part of me too, like I had such a great emotional journey. It's so sad, not great as in like happy, great as in just like meaningful, emotional journey with this book, that I almost felt like, if the next book isn't like our Wives Under the Sea, I don't want to read it.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, Our Wives Under the Sea was the kind of reading experience I was looking for. It was great.
I'm glad. I think it might be my favorite fiction from this year. I mean, we'll get into it, but just like her sentences, it felt so new. Like I felt like I hadn't heard her particular voice before. And that's such a rare thing. That's how I felt the first time I read Marilyn Robinson as well, where I was like, I've never read sentences like this before. And that's always a really exciting moment, where it's like not just a really good book, but like the quality and the style feels so new and just makes you feel so many things. I was like, yes, this is exactly what I needed. Exactly what the doctor ordered. The reading doctor. So, who is this writer? I literally know nothing about her. I figured out quickly that she is British, based on the way that she used the word flannel to describe a washcloth. And I imagined
that makes so much more sense.
Shirt.
I imagined a shirt for that entire bit, and I was like, that's weird. Then I was like, maybe they have like towels made out of flannel material, or like a bed sheet. I have bed sheets made of flannel.
Yeah, no.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah, that's what they call washcloths.
Okay, cool. We got that sorted.
I'm really glad I was able to clear that up for you. Anyway, so
I was like working with it. I'm like, Julia Armfield's writing is so visual. Yeah. I was like, I have the visual. I don't really. It made a lot of sense. I made it make sense, but it really didn't make any sense.
No,
so.
I think she ran out of towels, so she's using shirts. Maybe it's some kind of lesbian imagery. I don't know. Flannels!
That's a whole new read. Oh my gosh. I feel like I showed up with my whole analysis to class based on it being a shirt.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, girl, no. And I'm like, oh. But you're right. Julia Armfield is a fiction writer living in London. She is British. She lives with her girlfriend, who she says her girlfriend is fine, and their cat, who is garbage. She, as you were saying, this sounds like a very new voice for you, which makes a lot of sense. This is her debut novel. It came out in the spring of 2022. Previously, she's released a collection of short stories called Salt Slow in 2020. And she's got another novel in the works, is my understanding. I was listening to an interview on the Graham Norton Book Club where Armfield was talking a bit about her kind of background, like where this book came from. And it actually started as a short story. And she was reaching that time in her early career that many writers face, where they come with their short story collection to agents, and the agents are like, this is really nice, do you have a novel? And she's like, I don't have a novel. So she went and wrote a novel that she didn't end up liking, and then she had this short story, and she's like, you know what, I think there's more to this one. So that's where we get Our Wives Under the Sea. Part of her education I thought was interesting because it plays into some of the characters. She went to a Catholic school growing up and went to church a lot as a child. So a lot of the Catholic and religious elements we get in Our Wives Under the Sea seems to be, you know, pulled very much from her own experience and familiarity with that space. She has a master's in Victorian art and literature from Royal Holloway University.
Fascinating.
Yeah, which made me start thinking, like, if we see some Victorian elements in this novel at all. There's some, you know, like, I don't know, moodiness, maybe like a Wuthering Heights element of moodiness, but style seems very, very, like, contemporary. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really see the influence. That's interesting. I'll have to think about that.
So when asked about kind of her inspiration or where she started with this novel, she talked about how she wanted to write about two people going about their boring lives in a horror novel. And was really interested in how, in the face of terror and horror, like, we often default to being normal about it.
Yeah.
And it becomes normal over time when you're facing a long terror, as Leah's transformation is. In the same way that, you know, someone dealing with like a terminal illness for a long period of time, you and your family have to find some sort of normalcy, even if the normalness is insane. Even if it's like feels completely unreal, our brains like seek out some normalcy. So I found that kind of interesting way to describe how horror functions in this, because it's not like, you know, every single page there's like this menacing like creature that's following us or like spooky things happening. It's a really mundane daily life kind of look, but in the midst of like a horrific, terrifying sea monster induced body change.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, relatable. Like, there were elements of them being trapped in this house together that did feel familiar. This feels like a very millennial in the 2020s book, because it's like, or maybe she's early Gen Z, I don't know, but the, like, feeling of the world's falling apart around you while you're just, like, pacing in circles in your living room in your tiny apartment. It's like a very particular experience that I know quite well.
Yeah, she, in that Graham Norton book club interview, said she was interested in writing about how people respond to like one very, very strange thing going on, and how people always try to assert normality, or in a way, normality continues to assert itself, even in the most bizarre circumstances. And she does reference, like, even, you know, this past couple of years coming out of the pandemic and this kind of like quote unquote return to normalcy, and like how, I don't know if it's necessarily choosing it or just becoming so used to it that it becomes in the same way that Leah just, now she drinks salt water. That's normal now.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to walk us through like what actually is happening in this book?
Yes, I do. So this book takes place in two timelines. The past from Leah's perspective, which recounts her expedition in the submarine that goes wrong. And then the present from Mary's perspective, where she's trying to take care of Leah now that she's back, and they're stuck together in their apartment and not really talking to each other. Also relevant, Mary's mother was a hypochondriac, and Mary has been trained against those tendencies. So these two storylines alternate as they slowly reveal more weird shit that's happening, and the narrators deal with their own crazies. So in Leah's storyline, we get right away that all the power goes out almost immediately after they descend, but the oxygen and pressure and water and stuff all still work. They just can't move the ship, and they can't talk to anyone on the surface, and they can't see. We get the very ominous note that she learned later that this is probably on purpose. So this is written from Leah's perspective, sort of reflecting back after she's made it back, which we know she has because she's in Miri's apartment. Then we watch her and her two crewmates, Yelka and Mateo, slowly lose their minds, listening to mysterious noises and sort of watching nothingness out their window in total darkness. They've just got these flashlights. Yelka is also hearing a voice speaking to her, but she's super religious and she has all these sort of superstitions about what voices mean. And the other two don't hear it, and so they get into fights about it and they're all on edge. And Yelka ends up letting herself out of the pressure door. Once Yelka's dead, Leah starts hearing the voice too. We never know if Mateo does. So eventually the lights come back on their own, again, probably on purpose. Leah's then determined to see where they are and why there are no fish around, because she gets very fixated on, like, this isn't the ocean. This isn't the ocean. And they explore for a bit until they find this enormous monster coming up out of a crevasse, even deeper than they are in now, with this, like, giant eye staring at them. And Leah shows the monster her name. And then as they ascend, Leah's only thought is of her wife's name. And this is intercut with Miri's storyline present day. Leah's already been home for a bit, so we sort of start in the middle of things. Which, again, takes away some of the tension from Leah's story, because we know she comes back. But she's acting super aloof and weird. Her gums are bleeding, her skin is silvery, she spends all day in the bathroom with the water running, and she sleeps in a separate bedroom with a sound machine on. Like, she's not okay. And Miri has been, like, grieving her for the past 5 months, and doesn't really recognize this person, so there's, like, a lot of tension. So Miri works from home, and she's trying to take care of an uncommunicative Leah, and is trying to get help from the Center, who ran this expedition. Not an ominous corporation name at all. But she's constantly put on hold, and there's, like, constant sound of the TV on from their upstairs neighbor. It just builds this kind of claustrophobia inside this apartment. No one's ever connecting with her. The only connection she has to the outside world is through her not great friend, who's losing her eyesight. So she gets coffee with her, but she doesn't tell her anything. They go to a therapist a couple times that's paid for by the Center, supposedly, and this helps them communicate a little bit better, but then Leah starts throwing up seawater, and her skin is turning translucent, and so they have bigger problems. And Leah eventually gets to the point where she can't breathe outside of the water, so they literally just, like, hang out in the bathroom all day, watching TV, as Leah breathes water and drinks salt water, and they're just like, yeah, okay, we live in this bathroom now. And then Yelka's sister actually reaches out and says she's been investigating the Center, and that they just, like, closed up shop and disappeared, and, like, she has some information. And Miri kind of avoids it at first, but eventually she asks for her help to move Leah to Miri's mother's old house by the seaside. And once they're there, she talks to Yelka's sister a bit, and she realizes, like, she has to let Leah go. And so, by this point, Leah is almost completely jellyfish. Like, there's a part where her eye falls out. I forgot about that. Her eye turns into seawater and just splooshes. It's disgusting.
Yeah, before they leave their home.
Yeah, that's when they're still at home.
So she's got, like, one eye for the whole last act of the book, almost.
That's true, yeah. Oh, shit, I didn't even think about that. Just like the monster. They both just have one eye.
Oh my gosh, I didn't think of that.
I didn't think of that either!
I wondered why she wasn't losing the other eye.
Oh my god. I need to think about this now. Because I sort of erased that from my visual imagery of her. I was imagining this kind of loose, goopy woman with just, like, eyeballs. But I didn't think she only has one eye, like the monster! Oh my god. Okay. And so that one eye keeps eye contact with Miri until she's, like, completely subsumed by the waves, and then Miri's, like, sort of slightly off balanced in the ocean, just to figure out what to do next with her life, because, like, you know, this is insane. Yeah, so that is the whole thing. There's not a lot of plot. It's, like, just tension and metaphors and pretty sentences, and then some of the most horrifying fish transformation you've ever seen. And, like, you know, a giant monster at the end. But it's not a violent one. It just sort of looms and whispers, you know? It's all very just kind of floaty. Okay, so we wanted to start with, like, what do you think happened? Because
Yeah.
There are some very strong indications of what happened, but it's still kind of up to interpretation. And part of the whole thing is that we never quite know. Like, it was very, very nice that we do get to see the monster, because I feel like that sort of validates a lot of your feelings about how bizarre everything is and how scary it is. But aside from that, we don't get a lot of answers. So, in the process of reading the book, what did you think was happening before you saw the monster? And what did you think was happening to Leah?
At the very beginning, I mean, I was like Miri. I only had information from the center. So I thought, I don't know what happens to a person's body if they've been in a pressure-controlled submarine under the ocean for 5 months. Like, I literally have no idea. Like, maybe this is kind of normal. I was wrong. Not normal. And I feel like I had a hunch that there was, like, something down there.
Mm-hmm.
But I was very much, like, there's lots of hints that, like, the center is, like, doing things on purpose. And so I thought they were trying to run some experiment that has... And I wasn't sure if, like, this was all part of it or if, like, something went wrong.
Right. I mean, that's the big question.
And once Jelka released herself from the submarine, that's when I'm like, I don't think this was the plan.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also hard, too, because a lot of Leah's storyline happens in, like, the first few days. And then it kind of time jumps because it's just like, and then months pass. And so it's like, we don't really get the full intensity and horror of how long this lasted.
Right.
That to me does not seem at all intentional. I don't know. I mean, we don't get answers. And I was a little disappointed at first. And I was like, oh, I don't know why I ever thought this book was going to, like, answer it for me. Because it is a lot of vibes and, like, beautiful sentences and, like, much more focused on the relationship than, like, the logistics. But I was hoping for a little bit more of what the center was intending to do. I have other theories about what I thought once the monster was revealed, but I'm curious what you thought leading up to the monster.
Pre-monster, I thought, because Leah kept going on about how there should be something outside their window and there isn't. And I was like, well, they must be inside the monster. That must be why there's no fish. That must be why they can't see anything. That must be what the sounds are. I was like, they accidentally dropped into the wrong spot and they have just been swallowed or whatever equivalent, whatever shape the monster is. You know what I mean? I thought it was like a Star Wars situation. This is no cave, right?
You say this like I've seen any of Star Wars.
Yeah, yes.
For the listener, for the Star Wars listener.
And I kind of knew Leah was turning into something right away. I was like, she's clearly not totally human anymore, but that's partly just like genre expectations, you know? It was actually really shocking to me. Like, I was so taken aback by Miri thinking that Leah wanted to stay, that staying for 5 months was voluntary when it was supposed to be 3 weeks. I was stunned by that because I was like, clearly, this has messed her up beyond recognition. And you thought it was a choice? Like, that was really, really shocking to me.
It's interesting because I read that more, and maybe this was just like me infusing my personality onto Miri of like, I'm so angry at this circumstance and you aren't talking to me. So maybe if I like give the most obnoxiously mean hypothesis, you will actually answer me. That's kind of how I read it, as like, or even if she did kind of believe it, it was just out of a place of like intense fear and anger and grief because she, like, you don't expect someone to survive that, right?
Yeah.
You know, she was supposed to be gone a few weeks and it stretched to a couple months. And at that point, you're like, I think she's gone.
Yeah.
And then it's like even more months after that. And I think she's also grappling with, we don't really get a lot of this, but maybe a hint towards, I have already grieved that you're gone. I was like holding out hope that you would still be here. And now that you're here, you're not who you are. And I'm really upset. If you were going to come back, you need to at least bring back answers.
And I mean, I guess you're right. It kind of works because Leah does respond. She goes, where do you think I was? Where do you imagine I was? And Miri puts a piece of paper underneath a giant book and slams it shut. and sort of demonstrates that she does have a sense of how deep they were. And Leah changes a bit after that. She becomes more, she tries a bit harder to be more of herself. And we get little glimpses of it after that. Just a couple times, but it does change something. But yeah, once she started throwing up salt water, I was like, oh, I think she's becoming a fish. There's just some, something.
Fish, notoriously spitting up water. No, I could see that. When she was I'm a little slow to catch things, but for me, it was when she's breathing water, I'm like, oh, she's becoming a fish.
Yeah.
It took me a while to get there. What were your thoughts on the center? Did you think they were in charge of everything that went wrong? Do you think they planned part of it? We get weird hints that there's weirdness going on. What did you think that all was?
Like I said, I didn't want it to only be them. I really did want there to be a monster. And the ambiguous thing is did the monster cause all of this? Did the center cause all of this? Or I feel like it's kind of a combination. Because we do get that news article. Leah has this connected memory of reading this news article about when she was a kid, about the first all-female deep sea crew or whatever, and how they were being studied even as they studied other things. That was part of the article. But again, this is Leah writing this, so maybe she's just trying to interpret her reality, but there is that pretty strong hint that the center was studying them. But I don't think they knew the monster was there. I think that really messed with their plans, especially because of the way they closed up shop so fast after everyone got back.
Right. If this was intentional, I feel there would have been more conclusive.
Yeah.
And here's what we're doing next based off this research we got. Uh-huh. Even if it's disguised as, oh my gosh, it was an accident.
They would have stayed open. But this felt oh shit, we didn't realize what was down there.
I think also, we don't actually know what happens to Mateo once they surface. Mm-hmm. But we definitely know Yelka dies, and her family is, especially her sister, coming after them. Kind of I need answers. Tell me what happened. And so I'm curious if it was, they closed up shop because they had a death on their hands, because they had, they had planned to cut contact. Or I don't really see them being, oh my gosh, there's a scary monster down there, let's go away. I think it's more we did this on purpose, and then someone died, and these other two came back real messed up. Yeah. My theory, as of now, is that they descended, the power cutoff was planned, it was only supposed to last the couple weeks of the actual journey, and what happened is that they landed, maybe next to the monster. And deep sea fish, they don't move, they don't have to be fast.
Right.
And this is a big old monster. I think the monster was just chilling, and so outside the window they couldn't see anything because they were up against the outside of the monster. And so when the monster moves, signal's restored because the mass of the monster was so big that it interrupted the signal in a way that just the water and other animal life wouldn't have. That's my theory. It doesn't completely line up because, we just don't know. It's too ambiguous. I'm not saying, this is the only way to read it, but, that's my working theory of how I come to terms with what happened in this book.
Yeah, I feel like they just wanted to turn the lights off and see what would happen, and they accidentally found a giant sea monster.
It sounds like some 8th grader who had to put their science fair project together the night before, and they're like, you know what we're going to study? What happens when you turn the lights off? And they're like, we didn't plan much beyond that, but here's our experiment.
Yeah, because it's obviously very shady, and they're obviously up to no good, but the only thing that kind of messes with that interpretation is the eye insignia on the dashboard or on the control panel. Again, I don't know how much of this is Leah making meaning from her surroundings and how much of it is the author trying to point us in the right direction. But she has this thought of this insignia is not any part of the official branding of the center. It's not the center logo. It's just this one eye on her control panel she's been looking at for 5 months. And also, something you pointed out was how they wouldn't stop, that they went on and on and on about how they have endless fresh water before they put them on, and way more food than they would need for 3 weeks. So because you were like, oh, I think that's because they needed them to know when they cut the power off that they had endless fresh water. So I feel like it was meant to be longer than the couple weeks. But I don't know. My thought was like, Miri kept calling and calling and calling and getting the same response of like, everything's fine, it's just extended. And then at a certain point, they stopped answering. And I feel like whenever that was when they were like, oh shit. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think whenever that point, like, it was meant to be longer than 3 weeks, but whatever the point was where they stopped responding, maybe around month 2, 3, was when they were like, oh, we actually can't turn it back on yet. There's something interfering. That's my thought.
I now have another wild theory that has very little support, but the center is a cult worshipping the monster, and they are feeding the monster.
Oh my god.
But in that case, why not just, like, keep the sub empty and, like, let them all expel themselves into the water?
Yeah.
But
why bring it back up?
Well, I guess if the humans die inside the sub, the monster doesn't get to absorb them into the ocean.
You could just dump people into the ocean, though.
It's a very elaborate, like I said, there's not enough textual evidence for this, but it's a very elaborate ritual.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, maybe. But how would they know about it? Because no one's ever been this deep
I told
before.
you, there's no, there's no evidence for this one. I'm just making shit up over here.
Oh my god.
Okay, so next, what do you think caused Leah to transform? You know, maybe, this is part of the monster's, eating ritual, and this is how it feeds on humans, which is ridiculous. There's way more to eat in the ocean than there is even on land. So, yeah, what do you think made Leah change?
My interpretation is that something about the voice transforms them. So, Yelka's the one hearing the voice first, and then she throws herself into the ocean, which you could interpret as just like, she's in the dark hearing voices all the time and she wants it to be over. Like, I think that's a very valid interpretation. That's what you think at the time. But comparing her behavior with Leah's behavior when she's back, always in the shower, right? Just being in the water as much as possible. And I think something about the voice tells them makes them change or tells them to return to the ocean. And because Leah is resisting, right, she leaves the water and comes back on land. Miri eventually gets the sense that she was holding out as long as she could, but eventually she has to return. And so she turns into something where she has to go back. She's been sort of claimed. She's been fundamentally changed by her experience, which is, again, largely metaphorical, but she also has literally been turned into a jellyfish. But I also wondered if there was something, because, again, we don't know what happened to Mateo, but I wondered if there was something about her putting her name up against the window. I wasn't sure if that changed anything.
An arrival situation.
Mm-hmm. Very, very much an arrival situation. What about you?
I really like this idea of, the voice changing the body. I find that really fascinating. And that does seem to be, like, very notable. Like, even if it feels like it kind of a lot is pointing to that, right? Because Yelko's hearing voices. She ends up exiting the submarine into the ocean. And then immediately, Leah starts hearing them too. Mm-hmm. And so we also get a lot of stories about octopus, which... octopus are, like, really smart, and, like, also there's giant ones in the ocean, and, like, we're not really led to believe this monster itself is an octopus, but maybe pointing towards, like, other modes of consciousness. Maybe this monster in the ocean is able to telepathically communicate and is, like, has not found a brain this active before in the depths of the ocean, and so is, communicating in a way, and... I think, intentionally the author is like leaving this all ambiguous. I think maybe I would guess Armfield doesn't even really know what happened. Like, it's a lot of metaphor and like leaving it up to like just being spooky and scary and moving on. And I think that also makes me think a lot of Armfield's short story background and how this started as a short story.
Yes, 100%.
We can leave a lot of short stories being like, I have no clue what happened, but that was incredible. Whereas a novel we leave and I'm like, I want more answers. So like, that's what holds me back from being like, this was the perfect read of the year for me, is that like, it was really good and it's like not quite there for me because I do like my horror and my speculative fiction to like give me a little more answer in a novel form than this one does.
No,
I do think it's absolutely gorgeous though, and the way we talked a lot now of the logistics of what's happening in the plot, which we already started out saying there isn't really a ton of plot, especially because we already know Leah survives the submarine. But there's a lot that's going on in this book, and it's really building this beautiful relationship through flashbacks, and we see the intensity of their love. Also, we see that love expressed through grief, and it's, I think, really focusing in on, like, this theme of grief and, like, having to let someone go, and we see her literally do that when Miri lets Leah go into the water, as well as the opposite side of it. We see Leah, like, clinging on, and maybe that's why she was able to resist the monster in a way Yelka maybe wasn't able to, is Leah has Miri, and she's like, I can't stay. I thought it was also very clever and annoying for the reader that Armfield never tells us what the voice is saying.
Yes.
Which would give us a lot more detail and picture into what was happening. But yeah, I think to understand why Leah takes so long to change is like, we have to talk about the relationship in the book.
You brought up how this was originally a short story, and that makes so much sense to me because something we both mentioned was how without the Leah story, if it's just the Miri story, it just feels like a magical realism story about a marriage ending in which one of the wives turns into a fish, right? And it's just kind of an extended metaphor, right? But having Leah's point of view then makes the whole thing like a genuine horror story, you know? It does make you think a lot about her craft of how she put this together, because it is such a particular voice, and like it's so fascinating how she's able to make it spooky and make it haunting when so little is happening. You know, she mentioned in that interview how she wanted to look at people kind of going about their lives in the midst of the horrors, as we like to say. So, like, what does she do in terms of her writing style in order to pull this book off? Because it's very tricky tone and plot to capture.
We get it from, like, the very first page, and we get these, like, ideas that, oh, this is the kind of book it's going to be, where we have, like, very visual imagery, and it's not even when we're talking about monsters. We haven't even introduced the idea of monsters, but the descriptions are spooky. They're very focused on, body from the get-go. Body is, like, a theme that's, like, enveloped into all of the writing, even when we haven't yet seen Leah deteriorate. You pulled out some really great ones here, like heavy jewelry of bones, silence like a spine. I don't really know what silence like a spine means, but it's creepy.
Yeah.
If I was right inside my spine, I wouldn't hear much. And it's like, the spine doesn't say anything. Like, all the ways I think of it, I'm like, it's creepy. Dragging herself about the flat like a grappling hook, catching on furniture. And it's just like, oh, it's like so visual, and it just keeps bringing us back to the body and heaviness.
And, like, violence. There's, like, a very quiet violence and sharpness to everything. Like, even, and this is in one of the last chapters, when they're by the sea, but she describes it white mist on the ground like a tripwire. Like, even something soft and, like it's just water vapor. You know what I mean? But it's like a tripwire. So everything has this metaphor, these descriptors of this violence or this sharpness or these bones. You know what I mean? Like, there's every single thing is put through this lens of really kind of macabre body horror kind of stuff. And so it puts, even when you're just talking about Leah wandering around the house and not doing anything, it adds this tension. One of my favorite ones that I still, to be honest, do not understand what it means. This is the full extent of the phrase. Like, I'm not cutting it off anywhere. It's just her talking about Leah being gone in the bathroom, and then there's an M dash, and then it says, thin, colorless light in the morning and spiders all over the house. What? It's so visceral, and I love the way it sounds. Like, the cadence of, like, spiders all over the house, like, da-da-da-da-da-da, like, it's just so, it's so good. But what the heck does that mean?
Yeah.
Are there literally spiders? I don't know. But it's creepy. And then another one of my favorite ones, when Leah is, like, properly breathing water at this point, Miri goes, if I cut her, I'm not altogether sure she would bleed, which is an incredible reversal of Shakespeare, where I don't even remember which one it's from, but one of the guys is, like, you know, trying to prove that his friend's a human, and he's like, if you cut him, does he not bleed? You know, it's about this, like, shared humanity of, like, I am a person too. And then we have this reversal of, like, she's clearly not a person anymore. But there's also a violence to it as well. It's just like she's talking about literally, if I literally cut her, I don't think she has any literal blood left in her body, you know? Just such a clever, so good.
I mean, if I didn't already hear Armfield talk about the origin of this book, I could also hear this as the premise of a, like, writing prompt. Like, use the line, if I cut her, I'm not altogether she would bleed, in a story. Like, that's, like, at the core of so much of this book. That's really fun.
Yeah.
A lot of this book, too, is flashing back to their childhoods and both Leah and Miri's experiences with the ocean. So we're not getting the ocean only in, you know, Leah's, like, literal chapters that are under the ocean. We get, you know, backstory on why Leah is obsessed with the ocean, but also why Miri is not, and why Miri has a hard time with the ocean, and how Leah has, like, taught her how to swim. And so it's just, I feel like from the very beginning, in the content and the vocabulary and the way the sentences are written, like, we're in the ocean the whole time.
Yes.
Like, we're living in the heaviness and the pressure of the deeps. And we're reminded time and again of, like, it's so expansive and so big, but also so much, like, it's so claustrophobic. Mm-hmm. And Armfield does a really great job, like, infusing that into the writing. You pulled some quotes about all of these, like, ocean and water metaphors.
Some of them are just where they're literally talking about the ocean, but it clearly can be applied to other things like grief and emotions and love and this kind of stuff. Like, one of them is, there are no empty places. However deep you go, however far down, you'll find something there. Or, I remember thinking that the first things had come from the water, which didn't account for the things that had chosen to stay behind. Right, that's a description of the monster. Where there are big things down there, old things, and certainly more of them than we know about. You know, literally talking about the ocean, but could be a metaphor for so many things. Or you have descriptions of the ocean that make it sound like, in some ways, the ocean is the thing hiding behind, in the shadows, the thing hiding behind the door, you know, like the poltergeist or whatever of this story is, like, the ocean. Like, Leah describes it as the ocean is unstill, which I loved, and the ocean covers its tracks. Like, it's some kind of silent killer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they put a lot of violence in the description of the ocean itself, but then also very terrifying and haunting statements about the ocean that are very clearly, like, metaphors for their marriage and stuff. Yeah. So these are the things that are literally about the ocean. And then, as you said, like, there's so many points in there. Like, Leah's constantly compared to, like, a sea creature. There's a lot of important moments. Like, they both imagine themselves. They say they like to imagine that they shared their first kiss together with this octopus that Leah used to take care of when she volunteered at an aquarium, even though Leah had her first kiss there with someone else. But they like to imagine that it was Miri. And so they both put themselves into that memory a lot. And there's just a lot of, like, important moments throughout their relationship or with their relationships with their parents that involve water. I feel like there's so many different ways that you can interpret pick any sentence, any metaphor, and you're like, what does this represent? And I feel like you could make like 4 different arguments, pick a theory that you want and make an argument about why that's what that means,
I keep coming back to this, like, I immediately, when I was reading the book, I'm like, this is a book about grief. But then, as I keep digging into it, it's not about grief, but it's about so many other things, too. Mm-hmm. Because, like, I think so much of the grief is also about the love, right? Like, yes. The more, like, the depth of their relationship also reveals the depth of the grief as things have changed. And, yeah, so I feel like as we're revisiting some of these, I'm like, oh, yeah, these are horrifying, but also like Leah loves the ocean. Mm-hmm. And like Miri learns to appreciate the ocean and like see Leah's love for it, and it's like I don't leave this book thinking I never want to go to the ocean again.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go in a submarine. I have already decided that's not something I'm interested in.
Absolutely not. No, thank you.
But it is interesting to make the killer out of the ocean, because it is. Yeah. Like, that's what's going to kill her if she leaves the submarine, not the monster, is the pressure. Yeah, absolutely terrifying.
And that is what separates their marriage in the end.
Yeah.
It's the ocean.
Yeah, by making it the monster, I think what's also really clever is that it's not, like any good villain. It's got a good backstory. You don't just, like, hate the villain for being a villain. The monster in the ocean is, what's there. But I'm also not that creeped out by it. Almost like Leah is when she sees it and she's like, oh my God, that's what's down here. I needed to know. Okay, now I can go back up. And the monster doesn't stop them from coming back up.
Yeah.
Which also makes me believe, like, is the monster really a monster? I don't know.
It's just there, chilling.
Yeah.
It's just so old. Like, older than anything,
It just potentially took a nap for 5 months and didn't realize it was cuddling with a submarine.
Maybe. Honestly, maybe. Maybe it's when it came on and turned on its little lights, all of a sudden that woke the monster up. That was the first time it had, like, moved in 5 months. Who knows? One of the kind of extended metaphors / like character study moments that really felt like a short story moment to me that was horrifying and also real is the story in the first section about the woman who has the squid larva in her mouth.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that part. I did not like that.
Oh, God, it was so disgusting. But the way they each respond is really interesting because Leah really thinks about it. Like, she really contemplates it very seriously, and she seems like to genuinely contemplate keeping them there instead. Because she asks, like, do you think she is happier with them out? And Miri's like, what the fuck? And Miri has this super strong, like, negative reaction that sort of says something about how she feels about Leah in that moment, Like, you realize just how different they are now by how they react to this story. And that there's something wrong, they're not communicating with each other. But it's just an exaggerated story of something that really happened.
I didn't know that was real.
Yeah, if you undercook, I Googled it. There's a few instances. The most recent one was 2018, which is probably when she was working on this. But if you eat undercooked calamari and it still has the sex organs in it, you can get like an injection of squid sperm in your cheek. It doesn't turn into real babies, though, because it's just half the, genetic material. So the birthing of the babies in the cheek is like I couldn't find anything where that actually happened. So it's sort of a slight extension of a real story, though, a real thing that happens sometimes. So make sure you are eating very cooked squid.
This book apparently has a lesson, and that is the lesson.
Yes.
I think what also makes the book really creepy for me is the slower pace. This isn't like a slasher horror where we're running around and people being murdered. We're watching, like, this unfold slowly. We start with mostly a marriage drama, and we get, all these flashbacks that are just building out the kind of relationship they had, the relationship with their parents. It's, like, really painting the picture of these two women and their relationship. But then, like, the horror gets introduced with, like, really terrifying moments. Like you mentioned, like some of the chapters end with these and you're like, oh no. Oh no, especially because Leah's telling it in past tense. Like lines like, there in my reasoning was to assume that alone was somewhere you could go rather than somewhere you had to be left.
Oh, baby!
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Wow. Oh my god.
Or, quote, it would occur to me that the comms hadn't faded like a wavering signal, so much has been switched off, though by that time we all had more pressing things to deal with. And it also leads me to believe that Leah had more theories of what happened that she does not share.
Yeah, that's true.
And she does have 2 weeks of recovery at the center before Miri picks her up, which is, it's when she writes all of this. But is she getting more details there? We don't know. We don't get any more.
That's a good point.
But yeah, it really sets that ominous tone of like, something's up, something's wrong. Again, we already know she gets out, but we don't know anything else.
Something also that you pointed out when we were planning this was that in order for it to have this pace, Miri had to be a bit of a hypochondriac or be the child of a hypochondriac and so have been trained to kind of gaslight herself or talk herself out of her perception that things are wrong. And so when things that no one could have predicted are really, really badly wrong, she talks herself out of it. And so that is partly why they're able to just kind of sit in this weirdness for so long. And it's part of what creates the pace of, like, I don't know if every character in this situation would have just put up with this bizarre behavior the way Miri did and not talk to anyone about it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that was really frustrating to me was we get this setup that Miri maybe doesn't have a lot of really close friends except her one friend, Carmen, who has the eyesight problem, which is also basically a metaphor, a very big metaphor for just like not really seeing what's going on. And other than that, most of their couple friends are really Leah's friends. And we do have some scenes of those friends like maybe trying to check in. But I felt so frustrated with Miri that I'm like, you're not doing well. Like, you need to talk to someone. You need to tell a friend. You need to, like, where are Leah's friends that apparently care about her so much? Like, she was just gone for 5 months under the sea. You're not, like, coming by to see how she's doing. Like, in my mind, this is, like, someone just had a baby or someone had, like, a family member die kind of experience where you, like, you check in. You show up. It really disappointed me not to see that out of the other characters. They're not fully fleshed out. We don't really know the full extent of their relationships, but it made more sense to think of Miri as someone who is used to a lot of anxiety and thinking the absolute worst. And so when it's actually happening, she's like you said, talking herself out of it. Or like saying, it'll be fine. It'll all go away. It'll be fine. Maybe kind of stuck in that shock of, this is an incredibly insane experience. I will never be able to explain it to anyone. Therefore, I just will not say anything.
Yeah. One of the extended metaphors for me that was most powerful was like the unexplainability, the inability of language or communication often to sort of encapsulate, communicate grief and pain and trauma, and how Leah's just been through this horrifying, unexplainable experience that even when she's writing it down, she can't really put words to it. She can't say what the voice was saying. And she's really worried about being able to explain it to Miri, and she never really does. You know, she's had this traumatic experience she can't communicate. And you get the sense that she's like, Miri has no idea. How do I even start? And then Miri's the same thing, but with grief, right? Where she grieved her partner for 5 months. And then her partner came back, but like wrong, or like it's not her anymore. She's literally a fish. So like, how do you explain that? Where would you even start, you know? And if you don't have any practice communicating that, validating your own experiences like that, you know, that is so, even under the best of circumstances, it's, you know, Susan Sontag's got some great work on how impossible it is to communicate the pain of chronic illness. She has a great piece on like war photography and how people respond to it. Like there's just this certain amount of like, nothing can ever make you understand fully someone else's pain unless you also experience it. You can, as frustrating as it is to watch them do, you can kind of understand why they don't talk about it. Because it's like, how? Especially if you don't know these people very well. How would you even start?
It makes me, I mean, again, speaking of metaphors, as much as Miri as a character really annoyed me, I saw a lot of myself in her. And I think part of it was reading an anxious character as an anxious person.
Yeah. How does that feel?
It's at once, like, cathartic in a way. I mean, obviously, my partner has never turned into a jellyfish, but, like...
Thank God.
I felt like I could understand the character's experience on a personal level, but it was also tough to read. Like, I had to check in with myself at sometimes, because sometimes, you know, you're really in a book and you take on those emotions, and to just, like, live in anxiety wasn't always great. So I often ended with Leah chapters before putting the book down. And it just reminded me of, like, the need to speak about horrors and psychological distress and, like, trying to find words, even if you can't, but, like, trying. And, like, we see Leah kind of try. You know, when she says there was too much water when we were down there, I think we let it get in. It doesn't make any sense what she's saying.
Yeah.
But you can see her grappling with, like, trying to explain what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think of when I've been at my mentally worse with anxiety or depression, trying to explain to someone who doesn't experience that what it feels like and what I'm going through. And it's, like, really, really hard. Because on one hand, it's like, you're not going to understand me. And on the other hand, it's like, these words sound ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, if I tell you I didn't sleep last night because I was planning the eulogy for my father's funeral, who's alive and well and healthy, you're like, that's not a good thing. And I'm like, I know. The whole time I knew it wasn't good. But I did. I don't know how else to tell you. And just being able to, you know, these are, like, more lighthearted examples, but, like, yeah, being able to put words to it is something our characters struggle with immensely. And it's a very, like, I think that's a lot of where the relatability comes for me as a reader, of, like, you want to bang your head against the wall and be like, just talk to each other, just tell each other how it was. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to be reminded, like, yeah, that sometimes it's really hard to do. And I, thankfully, at this stage of my life, haven't experienced the death or loss of, like, someone super close to me who wasn't at an age where we were prepared for that experience. And so I also know that, you know, for my friends who have lost parents young, or siblings, or a partner, like, there's not many words they can give me that, like, really explains it. You know, I can't fully get it. And that's why I think it's important to find people with, you know, shared experiences to process and grieve with, and to just, like, you know, you might do it wrong, like Leah's friend who shows up with, like, a chicken.
Yeah.
Like a roast chicken. And then it's like, this is so dumb. I shouldn't have brought a chicken. What am I doing? I wish that friend would have tried again.
Yes.
And would have, like, pushed past the discomfort of, I don't know how to console you in the time of your wife turning into a fish. Though the friend was not aware that was what was happening, but.
And I loved that there was a Joan Didion reference at the end for so many reasons. We literally covered the book that it's referencing on this show, which felt very fitting. This was another moment, because you mentioned it felt like that was one of the sentences I quoted. You're like, that feels like a prompt for the, if you cut her, I'm not sure she would bleed, right? That feels like a prompt for the book. This is another one that felt like a prompt for the book, where it's like, write a literal interpretation of "Let Go of Them in the Water" from Joan Didion. And that's the entire book. Because, so The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion is about the year after her husband dies and her grief, right? And she has this quote: "If we are to live ourselves, there comes a point at which we must relinquish the dead, let go of them in the water. Knowing this does not make it any easier to let go of him in the water." So it's literally a metaphor for letting go of this person that you're grieving from inside your head. And then Yelka's sister brings it up, because she's literally grieving her dead sister, so probably, she doesn't say Didion, but she's like, I've read, you know, "Let Go of Them in the Water." That's something I've read. And then Miri has to literally release her wife into the ocean. Like, it's like, you can't get any more on the nose than that. But it's also exactly what's happening. Like, she is grieving. She's letting go of this loss that's in her head, but then she's also literally letting her go. And it just felt like, so when that part sort of clicked into place for me, I was like, oh my God! I really loved that.
I didn't even catch that was to the end.
Yeah.
So in some of the interviews, Armfield says how she finds romance and horror to be very similar. And
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this book, I think, really balances the two. I wouldn't say it's a romance novel. We actually don't get, like, a ton of the romantic feel-good stuff, but it definitely has those elements. And I think the love is, like, the other side of the coin of grief in this novel.
I mean, we talked earlier about how there were so many ocean metaphors to create, like, an ominous feeling, but there are also a lot of ocean metaphors that feel like descriptions of love as well. Like, this one, Leah's literally referring to their submersible vessel, but it feels like a love metaphor, right? It's a curious act of surrender when you think about it, the act of going under. To drop below the surface is still to sink, however intentionally. A simple matter of taking on water, just as drowning only requires you to open your mouth. It's like sensual and bodily, and it's intentional plunging into the unknown. It's like horrifying and sensual and metaphorical. Like, it feels like a lot how people talk about love.
Yeah, it's got that sense of, like, falling and, like, all-consuming. And, yeah, drowning in love is, like, a very weird image. But there's often, love and death imagery tied into each other. I think what stands out to me in their love story is the most, like, part of it is what you alluded to in your experience reading at the top of the show was just the very last chapter. And I think it was so masterfully done and written, that scene where we have, Miri letting Leah go in the water and Leah coming to the surface, thinking of Miri. And for me, all the, like, little snippets just, like, add up to that heartbreaking goodbye.
Yeah. That quote of, she is looking at me, this now the last of her, and she is still looking at me when I move my arms to release her. Oh, buddy. It's interesting because you're right. It's not very romantic, but when you get to this part, you feel how much they love each other, even though you've just spent so many chapters of them being either not in the same room or frustrated with each other or, like, things are going very wrong. But, like, we've gotten enough backstory of their relationship, and you feel how much they have loved each other throughout this whole thing, in spite of it being them being unable to communicate. And I think that's part of what's so hard about it, is they never get to talk about it.
I think what makes me feel a little hopeful in the end, though, is that Yuna gives Miri Leah's journal. And so we have the closure, at least, that Miri will get to read all about Leah's experience as she's written it down, as maybe part of that, like, answering some questions and maybe being able to move on from, or, like, move through her grief.
That's true, yeah. So if you think about it from her perspective, like, what on earth does she think is happening? You know what I mean? Like, if you remove the context of Leah's notes, it's so bizarre. But at least, like, she'll get to know how much Leah was thinking of her and how much she loved her in the end, no matter what.
It's interesting because in many ways, this book, is a literal and metaphorical look at, like, the death of a spouse. But in some ways, it almost also feels like metaphors for, like, a breakup or an ending.
Yeah.
Where there's still a lot of love, but there's been such a breakdown in communication and just, like, a literal change in what they need. Leah cannot exist on land anymore. And that, like, heartbreakingly beautiful, like, I need to do what's best for you, even if it's pulling us apart. And that layer, is, I think emphasized too in that line that you read where she's still looking at me when I move my arms to release her. It gives the agency to Miri in a way that if this was a little more strictly the death of a loved one, Leah would be dissolving and Miri couldn't would not have an act in that final moment necessarily.
Right, yeah. It's ultimately her choice. Because it's not like Leah just turns into just falls through her fingers or something. It's like, she has to push her in. It's so sad. So sad, but so good.
Okay, for those who enjoyed this book, what would you recommend they listen to, watch, read next?
So I would recommend the film Arrival. We mentioned that, just all the references that we get in this book. So the film Arrival, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. I think How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu that we just covered. The slow builds and the shiny skin and various other things. I think there's a lot of overlap. And then actually in the acknowledgements for this book, she shouts out The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery, which we have also covered for the Octopus Friends storyline. And so there's various different directions you could go, but these are all kind of the references I saw.
Arrival, based on the story of your name. It's a short story by Ted Chiang. It also, you referencing that made me think of the element of your perception changing and no longer being able to connect with your loved one in the same way you were able to before.
That's true.
Without trying to give it, I'm trying to not give it that away. But if those vibes are what you're feeling, go read that story. Okay, my recommendations for a very poetic, sapphic love story. This Is How You Lose the Time War by Max Gladstone and Amal El-Matar. I think I'll need another 5 years of reading before I give up recommending this book. I just don't have enough books like that to recommend. And so anytime we get anywhere close to it, I'm like, oh my gosh, go read This Is How You Lose the Time War. I also thought of, it's very different, but if you're looking for characters in bizarre circumstances with gorgeous writing, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Also, this is, shameless plug for the publication I work for, but Friction has a new issue out, number 20. It's our bodies issue. So there's a lot of speculative fiction and body horror and poetry, short story, creative nonfiction all around bodies. I was reading some of the pieces I hadn't yet read the other night, and I was like, this is giving me Our Wives Under the Sea vibes. So, okay, lastly, to wrap up, what are you currently obsessed with? What's bringing you joy? Our Wives Under the Sea aside, what are you thinking about?
Well, I spent the weekend watching The Bear season 2. I finally caught up.
Oh my gosh.
I know I'm very behind.
So validated in my TV show preferences when you were texting me about how much you were enjoying this season.
My brother and I both texted. My brother also was watching it at the same time because I got his Christmas present was Hulu without ads. That was my gift to him. So we were both watching it, and we both said, The Bear season 2 is one of the best seasons of TV I've ever seen. It's so good. I think Claire is maybe the weakest link, and she's really not bad. It's just compared to everything. Everything else is perfect.
Jamie Lee Curtis is
phenomenal.
God. Yeah, the jump backs episode, I was like, oh, this is kind of odd. We're spending a very long time, flashing back in time. It was incredible. One of the best episodes of the entire 2 seasons.
That episode needs to win awards. It needs to win every single Emmy that exists. Wow. What an episode. Anyway, and then I found a tiny forest in my neighborhood. And by tiny, I mean the size of size of a park. I found it on accident on a walk, and it was the best. I was like, this is exactly why I moved to Seattle, so that I could just accidentally discover a small forest in my neighborhood. And I've never been happier. So yeah. What about you?
Speaking of early Christmas gifts, early at time of recording, this is going to come out way after Christmas and everyone's going to be like, what? But it's early for us back here in the past. My partner and I decided for Christmas this year, we are giving each other a pair of matching Jordans. So we got a Black Friday deal. They're mauve. Maybe I'm a sneakerhead now? ? I have altogether 3 pairs of sneakers that I'm I feel pretty cool walking around in them. I have no brand commitment yet. They're all different brands, but yes, I'm obsessed. And I get why so many people wear them. I mean, they look stylish and cool, but they feel like you're putting on a well-structured slipper. It's just so comfy. I just like slide my foot in and I don't have to lace it and I look cool and I didn't even try it. And I'm like, this is why it's really popular in men's fashion. Looks cool, doesn't have to try it. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I've been recently getting into bluegrass music. My partner and I spent some time traveling in Appalachia and it's a delight. We listen to a lot of Billy Strings. I want to see someone play the banjo. I don't personally want to learn. I've already spent a lot of time investing in learning instruments, but I'm like really excited for other people to learn the banjo. It seems really fun.
That's so okay.
I'm losing it. I think I need to go eat dinner. But
yep. I think Victoria needs to eat and I need to go on a walk. I'm so glad we got to talk about this book.
Me too.
It's been great.
Until next time, happy reading.
Happy reading, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Book Club with Julia and Victoria. We would love to hear your thoughts on this book or the topic we discussed, so you can share your review and recommendations with us on Instagram at Book Club with JV, on our website, bookclubwithjv.com, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also visit our website for show notes with links to all of the recommendations and the things bringing us joy. If you don't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever podcast platform you are listening on so that you can be notified when our next episode is released. This episode was co-hosted and produced by myself, Victoria Bruick, along with Julia Clausen. Rebecca Gasme provides us with project management support. Our music is composed by Greg Bruick, and our logo was designed by Gabby Febland. Until next time, happy reading.